So, has anyone here heard of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? What about The Nightmare Before Christmas? So, these are actually some of the most famous works by Tim Burton, and it's okay if you didn't know that he directed them. It's still clear that most of us here have seen at least one movie of his, or at least heard of it. So, Tim Burton is my favorite movie director ever, and I've seen almost all of his movies, and so I'm really familiar with his work. And so, as I was researching his personal life, I realized that his experiences as an outsider helped him bring Gothic culture to the mainstream media. So now I will be showing you what he looks like. So this is what Tim Burton looks like, and now I'll be talking about his early life, his upbringing after Disney, and his cultural impact on society. So he was born on August 25, 1958 in Burbank, California. And here he grew up watching classic horror movies like Frankenstein and Godzilla, which would later influence his film style later on. And he also stated that as a kid, he would see the world around him as dull and lifeless. So he would often escape in his imagination, dreaming of fantasy worlds. Unfortunately, he did find out that his parents were depressed, which explained why he could sense that there was something wrong in the atmosphere and it felt very sad to be there. According to the book Tim Burton, the iconic filmmaker, and his work in 2019, it says here that his parents would barricade his bedroom windows with bricks, which would prevent him from seeing the outside world. Now, this incident caused him to admire a Gothic poet named Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote about being buried alive. And Tim Burton resonated with this because this was exactly how he felt. Now, throughout high school, he felt like an outcast because he drew so much and he watched so much movies, and he wouldn't communicate with other people because he had a hard time expressing his feelings, and so they thought that he was weird, when in reality, he was just introverted. But eventually, though, he did find his passion and he ended up chasing it. Now that I talked about Tim Burton's early life, I'll now talk about his upbringing. So for college, he went to California Institute of the Arts, where he became an animation major. Now here, he made Stalk of the Celery Monster. So this animation caught the attention of Disney, and after that, they just immediately hired him. Now this decision changed his life, not for the better, but for the worse, because he ended up finding his true passion after Disney just ridiculed him a million times. So for example, in the Toronto Star newspaper in 2010, he said here that he developed his distinct art style by being rejected so many times by Disney. Like, his bosses would call his artwork unoriginal or just straight up weird. But he didn't care. He kept doing them in that art style anyway. So if you can't tell, Tim Burton loved rage baiting Disney until they finally got fed up with him when he released Frankenweenie in 1984, which was a short film that kids loved, but parents absolutely hated. Now, Disney got a lot of complaints from parents saying that it promoted dog abuse and that it wasn't, suitable for kids. Eventually, Disney had to fire Tim Burton to prevent getting a lawsuit. Now, this was the best day of Tim Burton's life because he finally got to do whatever he wanted. Now, I'll be showing you all the movies that he made. So, he made Beetlejuice in 1988. After that, he made the Batman series in 1989. And then he made Edward Scissorhands, my personal favorite, in 1990. And then he made The Nightmare Before Christmas in 1993. So as you can see, getting fired from Disney was the best day of his life. Now that I talked about his upbringing after Disney, I'll now talk about his cultural impact on society. Now, Tim Burton made a name for himself to the point where he has an entire aesthetic dedicated to himself, which is called Burtonesque. Now, this describes anything or anyone that looks like they would belong in a Tim Burton movie. Now, most of the characteristics from this aesthetic stems from Gothic culture itself. So, in a way, he did popularize goth. So for example, in the Billboard article in 2014, it says here that the author praised Tim Burton for his great contribution to everyone who loves God. And he also mentioned that Tim Burton is synonymous with Halloween, meaning that in every Halloween there would always be someone dressing up from one of his movies. Which is true. I mean, if you were to walk in during Walmart or Target, especially during Halloween, you're gonna find something that's related to him. And so by popularizing eccentric characters, he's able to make people who felt outcasted embrace their true selves. So for example, in a peer-reviewed article in Hyperion University in 2012, it stated here that Tim Burton made characters that are usually perceived as villains in traditional narratives now be perceived as misunderstood heroes in his films. And so by humanizing these eccentric characters, he changed the way that the public viewed alternative people as a whole. In conclusion, I talked about his early life, his upbringing after Disney, and his cultural impact on society. Tim Burton's experience as an outsider helped him bring Gothic culture to mainstream media. And so, as a reminder, never change yourself just to fit into society's standards. Because as Tim Burton said, visions are worth fighting for. Why chase someone else's dreams? Thank you.